And welcome to the Backdale Theatre podcast.
The podcast where we talk about gender and representation on stage.
I'm Pippa.
And I'm Beth.
And we're your hosts.
Hello everybody, and today we are here with our very first filmmaker guest on the podcast. It's Chi Tai. Would you like to introduce yourself, Chi?
Hello, I'm Chi. I'm a film producer. I'm also part of Beats, which is an organisation that works in kind of representing, fighting for equality for British East Asians working in theatre, film and television.
Woo!
Awesome. Cool. So, how did you get into this world of film producer career?
It's really cliche. I was basically a little kid, and I loved the movies, and I watched a Spielberg film, and I remember watching an interview with him, and I was like, that is the most awesome job in the world. And I couldn't really articulate it in a far more kind of meaningful way than that as a 7-year-old, but movies was just something that stayed with me as I grew up, and they became increasingly important to me as a teenager as we go through those kind of rough years of high school and everything. And like by the time I'd finished college, I was like, I knew I wanted to be a filmmaker. I didn't know at that time even probably what a producer was. I kind of knew what a camera person was and a director, but I didn't really know a great deal else. But I was still lacked a great deal of confidence to kind of really go for it. So I did a kind of very boring conventional degree. And then
What was it?
I did anthropology actually.
Wow.
No, and it was great. It was actually in many ways the kind of perfect kind of bedding for filmmaking, but my heart wasn't really in it. And after I think it was the last summer holiday, I was just like, I'm going to go to film school. I'm just going to do it. So I applied, and I kind of managed to blag my way into film school because I think nobody wants to be a producer. It was like the only area where there was a deficit in applications. So they took me. They probably shouldn't have taken me. And I blagged my way on, and I went to film school, and that was the kind of the beginning of everything for me.
What school was it?
It doesn't exist anymore.
Oh no!
Yeah, so it was called the Northern Film School, which is now kind of being entirely kind of absorbed by, I think, Leeds Met Uni. So it's now like more than like a department within that kind of big institution. But when I went, it was basically, there was a house, and there was a kit room, and there was some rooms with like kind of post-production stuff, and it was basically go and make films. And
oh my god!
And it was like actually a really terrifying experience because I actually had very little background in film. Everybody had some background in film, and I kind of felt like I was back in high school, like when you're getting picked for the hockey team, like nobody wanted to pick me. But luckily, because film school is like high school, like all the relationships had like just generally will implode at some point, and then I was the only person like decent left to work with, and I made that work for me.
And
So-
for a producer, people want producers.
Exactly.
Yeah. So how does it work so was it a filmmaking course?
It was, yeah. So it's an entirely kind of technical course.
Right.
So there was no theory, and it was literally a kit room, a studio space, and a couple of sound suites and like picture post suites. And they basically took in cohorts of X amount of directors, like 5 or 6 directors, 5 or 6 producers, sound, camera, and there was, I think, like running parallel was a screenwriting course. So basically, you had all your HODs kind of within the school, and then you would just like make some films.
So everyone kind of knew what roles they were interested in.
Totally,
to do.
yeah. So you had to specialize. When you applied, you had to say, "Well, I'm applying to kind of specialize in directing." Or whatever, and I was smart enough to know at that point that nobody really wanted to produce. So I was like, I'm gonna go.
I'll do it, and I'll be the best.
But it was a wonderful thing for me because I actually fell in love with producing. So it was, in that way, it was a happy accident, and it was my kind of my introduction to really understanding producing it as this kind of, there's filmmaking in terms of the art of film, but there's like the art of business in film, and the two things are really kind of wonderful. I find both like incredibly difficult but like creatively satisfying, and kind of wonderful to be in that space where you can have you know, the agency that you have and the creativity you have. So, you know, it was kind of being at film school to kind of bump into producing like that was like kind of love at first sight. I don't regret it at all.
So how do you describe what film producing is to someone? Because I remember being younger and being like, oh yes, there's directors and there's producers, but I don't understand what does what.
I think it's really hard because there are so many different types of producers, and I think this is probably true in theatre,
because it's exactly the same in theatre. Yeah.
So you can get producers that are maybe just very good at certain things. In independent film, which is where I operate now, is you don't have a luxury of having a team of producers, one that's really good at funding, one is really good about distribution, one which is really good about the sales, and one is really good about, you know, the cast or whatever. In independent producing, you kind of have to do it all yourself, so you have to be really good at, you know, finding the talent, finding the money, finding all the opportunities. And, you know, it's a blessing and a curse. Like, I love it, and to be honest, like, I've struggled a bit working with other producers, but yes, and that's the reason why it's so hard to kind of define, is there's so much kind of coverage, and there's, like, with some directors there's a lot of overlap. Like, you know, if your collaboration with the director is kind of very, very close, they should be coming to all those meetings with you, with the funder, you know, with the distributor, because both of you are kind of birthing the film into the world. You have a kind of real equal responsibility to getting the film made and getting the film out there and making sure it connects with audiences. So yeah.
Do you work with a different team on every film, or do you work with the same people often, or are you...
I think so. I have a kind of go-to kind of crack A team in terms of HODs and below the line crew that I go to if I can always go to.
By HODs, do you mean heads of department?
Exactly. No, absolutely. So, like, I have, like, my kind of favourite, you know, cinematographers to work with, sound designers to work with, or post houses, and, you know, there's my kind of team. But sometimes when you're working with directors, they also have their team, you know, and so forth. So there's, you know, you come together, and there's some things you can bring and some things you can't. Like, everyone has to kind of, you know, carve out their kind of corner. And that's great because you know, you want to kind of be introduced to new people. Like, I don't think it's necessarily good to constantly be making the same with the same people all the time. What I do believe in is how we make. So I've harped on a lot about this lately, but like, there's always been an emphasis of what we make. Yeah. But actually, where I see a change in thinking is like how we make those things is equally important. So where you're seeing now producers trying to crew like equally between men and women and trying to be more inclusive, you know, that is as important as the end result, because actually they all feed into the end result. So that's, yeah.
So it's kind of similar in theatre, where we talk about wanting better, for instance, gender representation, but it can be very surface level if it's just the actors. Totally. And then you see the creative team and it's all white men.
No, totally. And that's awful, because everyone at some level has some kind of agency, and I think there has to be a change. Like, we need to be cooperative instead of collaborative. Like, in how we kind of change the world, we have to be, you know, kind of lifting each other up as we rise, as opposed to kind of thinking about ourselves. I think that's kind of really important, because I think there was, you know, a part of history where I think some women were doing really well, but they were pulling the ladder up after them, and there wasn't this kind of spirit of lifting other people up. And I think that's a really important way of how to work, is, you know, to kind of celebrate those people, especially when they come from, you know, unprivileged backgrounds.
What's the difference between, you said cooperation instead of collaboration?
Did I say that? I probably meant like competition. Yeah. So like, because I mean the industry, you work in theatre and film, it is incredibly competitive, and that can make people, I think, very defensive instead of open. How they share opportunities or how they share knowledge, you know. So I think we kind of have to, I saw this kind of, I think a great presentation where somebody was kind of dismantling kind of how, you know, kind of how you work, and it's like, let's not be competitive, let's be cooperative or collaborative, let's not be rock stars, let's be kind of mentors to each other. And it was about, like, you know, there were just these kind of very subtle kind of changes, but it's a far more kind of compassionate way of working, and I think, you know, it's right for kind of where we are now.
Yeah, rather than there can just be one person doing this job and I'm the only one, I've got to hold on to my little pedestal.
Well, especially in the space where we are, where there seems to be only room for one big, you know, female director or one big female, you know, writer. You know, it's like in Britain, we can only support Gurinder Chadha. Like, seriously? There should be 20 of these women, you know, and people go like, there's room for more than one black director. You know, we can do more than this. So kind of moving away from that kind of tokenism, I think, is really, really important.
And so you are battling this with your film.
Yes. I'm trying to. So I made a kind of really big change, I think, starting a few years ago. So when I kind of returned, so I took a little break as a producer when I had my kids. So I've got 2 kids. When I came back to work, I was just trying to reestablish myself and my roster. And I'm kind of happy to admit this now, but I was being very opportunistic. Like, if a project seemed good and I felt like I could do it, I'd be like, yes, I can do it. And I've really changed from that point to now, where I have to really think, like, me as a producer, should I be doing this with my time? Like, you know, there's only so many things that I can do. And is this a thing that I want to kind of contribute to the world? So there has to be, like, I couldn't just take on a job because it was a good opportunity. I had to kind of really think about, firstly, was I the right person? Like, I had to question, like, does the world need another one of these films, and all these kind of things. So I was really thinking with my conscience a little more. So I kind of had a really, like, in film terms, I think they got long night of the souls with all my projects. And I kind of had to let a few go. And it was really sad because I'd, you know, come to really, you know, love working with my kind of co-conspirators, but it didn't feel right for me anymore. And I got into a place where I was kind of redefining my work. So it's really important for me now to be kind of working in a space where somehow the narrative is part of dismantling, you know, privilege. I have to have the agency to work within the project to actually kind of be able to be very inclusive about how I work. Because all of these are kind of good opportunities to kind of make change at the end of the day. So Automat is probably, you know, my kind of latest example of kind of working like that. So Automat is a story about a woman who works in a fulfillment center. And for those that don't know what a fulfillment center is, when we buy our things off places like Amazon, it's the warehouse where everything is stored.
What a name.
I know.
Fulfillment center.
It's kind of ironic. And I was just really getting into this space where I was starting to really question how I bought things and the need to have everything cheaper and faster. And you can see this not in just how we buy products, day-to-day products, but you can see it how we travel with the Ubers of the world, how we eat, the Deliveroos of the world, generally things about the gig economy. And I started kind of getting pulled into this space where I really wanted to kind of explore and question, like, the invisible labor that makes it possible for us to do that. And actually, in terms of a society, you know, question for society whether that was the right thing. Because we know Jeff Bezos makes millions, billions of pounds per minute, and he can probably afford to buy a house and a car for every homeless person in America. Yet he is not paying his, you know, his fulfillment workers and you know, a fair wage for what they're doing. There's a lot of suppression of kind of the need to unionize and all sorts of things. And it's been widely reported now that people that work in these warehouses that, you know, they piss into bottles for fear of taking breaks. Ambulances are called, like, I think in the UK alone in the last 2 years, you know, an ambulance is called over 600 times because the working conditions are so hard. And I kind of felt there needs to be a mainstream place to kind of talk about these things. So we created Automat to kind of look at that from a narrative angle. And because I am who I am, I had to make sure that the protagonist in that film was going to be played by a British East Asian actress, and we worked with Sophie Wu to do this. So I suppose this is what I'm saying, is like, this is where everything kind of converges in terms of the kind of films I want to make and the people I want to make them with, and how they then kind of, you know, communicate to kind of audiences. Is like, going back to that thing, is what we make is as important as, you know, how we make these things. So.
And does that influence, because I find it's really hard with those kinds of issues as well, even then with how you're creating or that message. So for instance, with filmmaking, is it then hard to be like, oh, we have to, you know, find all these products that we need to get for the shoot, or props or whatever, and then you're like, but the most convenient way within the time frame I have, at the price and the budget I have, is through all these convenient outlets like Amazon, for instance. You know, has that then also been a minefield to be like, it's also representative of, you know?
Absolutely, it's really hard, like, and it's like kind of crazy, like, if you want to, you know, run a green shoot, there's organizations now you can be part of to kind of do that. You have to pay a small premium to do that, and to be honest, as an independent producer, I can't afford to do that. So the whole thing is there's little bombs everywhere to trip you up. It's really hard, and I haven't perfected it yet, and I think to a certain degree I can't get it like 100% right, because I'm still working in a space where all my projects are underfunded, and to a certain degree myself and my co-conspirators and the wider team are kind of subsidizing the art for, you know, for society, and whether that's the funders kind of problem or whatever. Like, I'm not in a space yet where we can be completely like efficient in all these spaces, so it's really, really difficult.
I think there's a huge dilemma for anyone who's making art that's about or trying to change the system from within the system. Is like, the capitalist world we live in is where we're operating, and yet if you want to make something to try and transform that, then you have to
have all these barriers
work within all the constraints that were already given. But I've watched the trailer for Automat, and it does seem like it's very kind of pertinent for, like you said, what does the world need right now? I watched that trailer and thought, this is the film I want to see right now, because it's about this huge issue which I think about every single day, every time I buy something, and, you know, take away coffee cups, all of this stuff. You think, where does all this stuff come from? And consumerism. But then at the centre of it is this female friendship, and like women working together to like kind of tear down that system a little bit, is kind of what I got from the trailer.
Yeah,
I obviously haven't seen the whole film yet, but yeah, it seems like
you can apply that across all the kind of, what, you know, the most important kind of issues of our generation: climate change, plastics, the whole kind of shebang. Like, how do we change that? Like, I would love to live plastic free. I just don't know how to do that. Like, and I've seen the videos of the people that go into supermarkets with their jam jars and everything and filling it up, and it's like, it's a massive shift. So you know, I have a lot of anxiety about this, and I don't really have the answers, to be honest.
Well, it's up to every supermarket to have jam jars, rather than, do you know what I mean? It's not up to like the one individual person to be like, I'm going to save the world with my jam jars. Like, it's up to changing the big corporations.
But we're all here as ladies wanting to change the world.
True.
Aren't we?
Yeah.
Like, that's what we're trying to do with whatever medium we're working with. But it is hard. I feel like such a kind of small, tiny, you know, people say minnow, I don't even feel like a minnow, like a tadpole.
Yeah. So, because I don't know much about the makings of independent film, what has been the kind of time frame by which that you make this film, and is that typical of the films? Is it always different for you, or, you know?
It's really different. I would say in the general scope of things, like Automat probably happened fairly quickly, because we managed to get some amount of funding. There's some projects I've been working on for a long time, and it's finding that big chunk of money that can make everything go. You can be waiting years for that, and it's something that's not talked about a great deal. But I think the same as in theatres and film, there's stamina is really undervalued. Just having the stamina to kind of go the distance. And the truth is, when we talk about stamina in this business, what we're really talking about is means to survive. And this is the thing that really saddens me the most, is there's a great deal of people that have a lot to offer, that have talent and all these things, that have the necessary stories, but they don't have the means to survive the long runway that you need to kind of survive to get to a point of success. at some point you're kind of like, well, actually, I can't afford to continue to live like this. And it's not to do with passion. Like, to be honest, persistence costs money. I am not too proud to say, like, I'm probably persisting because I'm here by the grace of a very supportive partner. But the truth is, if I didn't have that, I probably couldn't be doing the things that I'm doing. And I don't think the fault is with the things that I am choosing to do, but a wider ecosystem that somehow makes, kind of prevents people from being able to persist.
Which is very convenient for, capitalism and patriarchy.
Indeed.
Absolutely. Before we go on to feminist faves, I want to ask you about film in general. And because you mentioned your teenage years and how film kind of like spoke to you and got you through, I wonder if there's any filmmakers or films that have inspired you to keep persisting and kind of fed into this stamina that you have and this ability to kind of keep slogging away, and the passion that obviously showed through when you're trying to get into film school. And obviously it's hard to get in. They must have, it can't just have been that they wanted a producer, like they must have seen this passion in you.
Blagger.
No, we can see that you really love it, like I can tell.
I think everyone, to survive to a certain degree, needs to be able to kind of blag. I wouldn't say anything I do is any more kind of classy than hawking a project around, to be honest. But it's funny because, and I did a film about this last year called Unseen, and it's about the values that society kind of prescribe to you on basically how we look as women, or as people of colour, or wherever you come from. And I kind of feel sometimes that's, I think lots of people relate to, like, they're not kind of getting the value from society. Like, I have a different idea of kind of what I'm worth to what society is, willing to kind of give me. And I think increasingly as I've got older, and I think is something that you definitely will feel more, kind of sharp as a woman getting older, is you really get a sense of that kind of ceiling and that being kind of closed into a space. In some ways it's really hard to reconcile, like, the younger me to the me now, because I was very naive. I didn't understand the system was, like, we have oversimplified understanding of racism. It's not about being, from my point of view, I'm a Vietnamese refugee, being called a chink is not really, like, that is kind of a very superficial layer of racism. And now I'm much more interested in, like, systemic kind of racism. So it's hard to think of the younger me and the films that I like are probably not going to be the films that I like today, because I did that whole very cliche kind of journey into film of kind of what I watched, and
especially when we're told that all the filmmaker auteurs or the Spielbergs, the Hitchcocks,
totally. And this is it. Like, so
all those past favourites that you
totally like. I grew up, like, watching all those things and, like, worshipping at the altar of kind of auteurs, and I've had to kind of dismantle that for myself. And I don't think I've really arrived at a place yet where I can say, like, this or this. I'm probably much more kind of inspired by, like, kind of certain campaigners that are, like, kind of moving in certain spaces that are really trying to lift up women in film, or, like, I would say the closest person that I think represents kind of how I want to work and the things I want to do is probably someone like Ava DuVernay. There's not really anyone from my kind of heritage yet, I believe, that is kind of operating in that space. So it's almost embarrassing to look backwards, to be honest, and kind of look at myself as a kid, because
we're not to blame.
I can see that I was kind of very kind of lost. You're kind of in the system, and it's taken me a long time to kind of really understand who I am. I'm interested to know, because obviously
our way into talking about representation is through the Bechdel test.
Yeah.
Was that ever a part of your education in film? Because I learned primarily about the Bechdel test when I did film studies A-level, and that's where I heard about it. But I'm just wondering if it's still a conversation that happens, or if it was at the time.
I did not learn about it.
Because you
until
did.
I'm
it.
impressed.
Yeah.
I did not hear about it until I was like,
and
I'm
I'm
really
wondering if
impressed.
that,
Yeah.
I'm really impressed that you kind of learned that at A level.
Yeah.
I mean, I only heard about the Bechdel test when it kind of hit all, there was a moment for it a few years ago, and it was wonderful. It was a real moment for me, and I was like, yes, this is amazing. I think the most beautiful thing about the Bechdel test is such a simple tool that anyone can use. And I like to think of it as a tool as opposed to just a story. I mean, that people tell each other an anecdote, because you can actually apply the Bechdel test to a script. So that means you can apply it really early and go, shit, like, what have I done? It's a really fantastic kind of tool. And we've, so in another line of my work, I also am part of an organisation called BEATS, which is about representation and equality for British East Asians. And we were so inspired by the Bechdel test that we have been working on our own, what is going to be called the BEATS test. And
Great!
Yeah, and it's going to be a tool that allows you to see if the characters you've written into your script are been racialized, stereotyped, orientalized. It's actually really hard, as we all know, as kind of makers. The simpler something is, the harder it is. So, but we're really excited. It's something we're working on, and to us, I can't wait to get to the point where we feel really happy that we can release it, because I think it'll be a tool. So instead of us going complaining or whatever it is we do, protesting or the lobbying, to be able to say, we've got a tool that you can use it at a really early stage of your development, and we hope it's going to help you to provide a meaningful British East Asian character that is going to be somehow free from the usual kind of cliches. That's where we kind of want to get to with it.
Amazing.
Yeah, it can. I feel like it can be a really positive thing if you if people
Totally.
take it on as like a thing to inspire them rather than a thing to be like telling you off because you don't pass the test.
It's almost too late at that point,
Yeah,
right? Isn't it?
exactly.
So to have something at the beginning, I think, is wonderful. And I hope it can be used in theatre as well as film and TV. And the most important thing for women or anyone from any kind of background that's not from a privileged background is we just want to be kind of represented as humans at the end of the day,
Afforded the same rights as any mediocre white man.
Exactly.
Such a huge ask considering the amount of privilege that the mediocre white men have.
And I think we will only have reached that point because women, as well as people of colour, people from disabilities and any other kind of background, like there's always so much pressure that the thing we do becomes so successful. Like when Beats did the Gold Open for Crazy Rich Asians, there was it was really fantastic. There's a lot of literature about this, but the whole community had to come together to make sure it was a success. And I feel that true success will only be measured when we have an equal playing field for failure. And that's how I feel like. I think it should be okay for us to make shit films.
Yeah.
And shit theatre, at some point, as opposed to because we live in this narrative poverty, everything has to be right.
Yeah, you have to have Black Panther, Crazy Rich Asians smashing the global box office for it to be considered, oh, okay.
Yeah.
Like, why can't we just make
You can't just have an all right
a plethora of films?
Yeah. I do. This is one of the reasons why I feel heartened, for every single theatre show that we go and see that passes the Bechdel test and that has been invited us because they have a huge variety of different kind of representation, and they've invited us because we know we like that, and we'll go and see a show, and even if it's mediocre, even if it's undercooked or it has something
Not
bad about it that we
ready.
don't like about it, or it's not to our taste, whatever it is, I'm still just fucking happy that it's happening.
Yeah.
And I feel like I'm so glad to see mediocre play that is increasing that majority of things being more representative.
Yeah, no, it's really, really, really important. So
I mean, I want everything to be awesome.
Yeah.
I want everyone to be achieving and smashing those box offices. But everyone can't in the
Yeah.
arts world. There's a journey. This person who's making a mediocre film or play this week might end up smashing the box office next week because they've been through that experience of
But it's a journey, isn't
Yeah.
it? It's a journey for the artists that make those films as well as the theatres that put it out.
Yeah.
Like this week, there's a great news that Talaware is finally getting its own theatre, and I'm like, it's always been on the Beats kind of roadmap to be like, you know, sometimes the thing that's prevented the work getting out there is just a venue. I'm like, give us a venue, you know.
Space.
Give us a space. Give people the space to be able to do what they want to do. But this is, again, it comes back to kind of changing the ecosystem of where we are. That's a really hard thing to do.
It's a long game.
Speaking of people we like to shout about and good representation, feminist faves.
So this is tricky. So I don't know if it's quite a feminist fave, but the book I've been thinking a lot about recently, and I've actually only just started reading it, is a book by Robin DiAngelo, which is called White Fragility. And the reason why I think it's really important and I would recommend it is, I think in the UK, I think the US is probably quite a lot more advanced in its kind of discourse about race. But in the UK, it's something that's really, really hard. But White Fragility is really a book about giving people tools in the background to be able to have a meaningful conversation about race. And I really think until we do that, like dealing with representation, which is really another word at the end of the day, equality, it's really hard to have that conversation, really hard to kind of push those solutions. So I think it's a really relevant book in all those spaces that are kind of really lobbying for equality.
Is it aimed at a white audience or predominantly people of colour, or is it for everybody who's involved in or has an interest or in the conversation around race? Because I know Robin DiAngelo is white, isn't she?
She is,
yeah.
and I think in this case that's like kind of really great because she's actually criticising the white community, and she was quite pointed about calling it white fragility because it was attacking a very kind of, you know, specific kind of part of that conversation. So I think it's kind of relevant in many spaces, but I think it's going to, you know, hopefully it's going to be a very useful book as a kind of, you know, starting point for people to kind of look inward and to think about how they think about race. It's prickly. It's really prickly because everyone hates being called a racist, but the system
has taught us that racist is like, oh, you're Hitler. Like, it's not, you've grown up within a system that gives you prejudices and that you benefit from, and you have all these, you know, ideas in your head about why you might be better than somebody else. Like that is a deeply embedded idea in society and a system, not like just calling each other nasty names.
Exactly. It's like it's way more than that. And that's why it's so hard, because it is systemic. It's like kind of built into institutions in the same way, you know, patriarchy or whatever we talk. So when we're in this space where, you know, there is a collective effort, and it's wonderful that there's this effort to kind of dismantle kind of privilege, giving people the tools that they need to. It's you know, it's in terms of patriarchy and like equality for women, it's like men saying, but I have a wife.
Yeah.
I have a daughter. Oh,
I can't possibly.
Who is it? It's Jeremy Hunt who has the Asian wife.
Oh yeah,
her nationality wrong.
Oh my god, how could that happen?
Unbelievable.
Oh my goodness, I have mixed race children. I know.
Yeah, and that person recently with the funny tinge comment.
Oh my goodness,
no.
Angela.
Yeah, I mean, it's like every single week there's something like this.
I mean,
but
it's
these
just there, it's
headline
just-
things, which are like somebody uses a slur, somebody gets the word wrong, is like, I think is, you know, it's so much deeper than that.
Yeah, that's only the end product of the system. It's less about her saying that. It's more that she's been bred in a way to say
exactly.
that.
It's a just slight index of like what you say, what's going on underneath, but not an auspicious start, really.
Yeah.
I know.
Yeah. Right, I'm going to get this book. Thank you for your recommendation.
Thanks very much. And where could our listeners find you and support your work and support your film? I know you have a Kickstarter.
Yeah, it's all like I'm tweeting a lot at the moment, as you can imagine, because I'm kind of mid-campaign, but you can get me at Cheevel on Twitter, but you can add the link.
Yeah, we will.
We will do.
Fantastic.
And do you know when and where people will be able to see your film?
Well, it will be broadcast on Sky.
Ooh.
On
Yes, because you're part of the Sky Arts.
We are, yeah. So it's going to be on there, and then we're going to be doing a small kind of very targeted kind of festivals campaign. And if we get enough money, although the fundraiser isn't going too well now due to the success of another campaign, Living with the Lambs is kind of, you know, creating so much noise it's kind of hard to get everywhere else. We will do a really fun kind of special screening for cast, crew and pledges and the general community. Yeah.
Amazing. So you
Lovely.
could pledge and come to the special screening.
Yes,
That would be so cool.
that would be great. And it was fun. So we did the screening for Unseen. It was really, really fun. And the thing is, like, often I'm sure you get this, like, you're preaching to the converted. My goal is, like, to kind of move beyond that space. Like, the immediate community is really important, but how do we tackle, like, broader society and, like, you know, preach to the unconverted is kind of my next, it's what I'm thinking about.
Yes, I love it.
Screen it to
Awesome.
Amazon.
Oh god.
Invite them.
Blacklisted.
Yeah.
Oh man. Yeah, I would love to see it on Amazon Prime. Like criticising from the inside. You've subscribed. Now look what you're paying into.
I may need to do that. If I can just slip in
under the radar.
Yeah.
Do it. Cool.
Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
That's it. Goodbye.
Goodbye.
Thanks, Tree.